Thank you very much, Ian, for introduction, and thank you very much, everybody, for coming. And for the first 10 minutes, I will do a very quick presentation so that you get some pictures, because if we just discuss, there's no pictures, no visual effect. So I want you to get some idea of what's in a book and also what's in a book and why I'm writing this book, and also we'll discuss a specific story, Weaver Girl and the Cowherd, and then we'll have a discussion, three of us. So my presentation will be about 10 minutes. Okay, so let's kick start. Of course, after that, we'll have Q&As, etc. So now, why we write this book? Given that many people in China have read a lot of stories like this, and in English, we also have a lot of stories like this. But when I read all these stories to my children, and also when I do all of those, I found the problem with the existing structure, especially if you go to YouTube or you go to many, many books, there is a very, very big problem, which is when those old methodology were sort of developed, they were not developed in line with, for example, modern morality, modern principles, etc. Of course, they have at that time their own cultures, institutions, and main thoughts. But nowadays, we need to update some of them in line with the modern philosophy and modern morality. So this is why I'm sort of trying to update some of the stories that we have been passed for generations. Okay? So now, that's one thing. The second one is there is a lack of logic in those books, in those stories. For example, mythical stories, sometimes they can jump around and then they can have all those sort of imaginations. The problem is that you have to be logically coherent, but sometimes they do not resort to logical coherence, and then sometimes they're just jumping around. And this is the thing I try to avoid in this book, and then this is the thing that I try to enhance so that people will not say, oh, this is just a stupid story. It's not read-worthy. I try to avoid that. So this is why I devote some time to write this story, because I think this is very, very important. Because now, if you tell a story without logic, people will just laugh at it. And then those culture, those essence in the story won't be passed down generations. Now, this is why in this book I try to do those things, and hence the book. Okay? So now I will try to give you a story which is very similar to other stories in Greek, in Egyptians, and in even the popular, of course, in Europe, and also even, let's say, Disney has this Little Mermaid stuff. They all have the same feature, which is normal mortals falling in love with a god. And then, of course, there are other stories, like normal humans falling in love with demons, which is another story which also touched upon in the book. And of course, sometimes humans falling in love with humans, but not within the same class, not within the same social class and also economic status. So basically, this is across different social classes, across different species even, sometimes. So those sort of love. So the basic story we want to tell is what is love itself. So can love be happening between species, between gods and humans, between humans and demons, etc. And now, this story, the basic structure is this. So this has been there for those of you not familiar with the story. Basically, you have a weaver girl who is a goddess, and then you have a cowherd who is a human. And then they fall in love, and this was not permitted by the celestial gods. And then, as a result, they were separated by the Milky Way. And after that, because people wants to celebrate their love and to resist the patriarchy, etc., so they start to celebrate this true love. And then this day, the seventh day of the seventh month in the lunar calendar, is the Chinese Valentine's Day. Okay, so this is the basic structure for those of you who didn't know. But now, in China, there are a lot of cultural heritage of this. This is in Xi'an, which is my hometown, and they have a Qixi Park, a whole park of couple of, I think, 100 acres devoted to those stories. It's called Qixi Park, and then those are the statues. And so this was me two years ago. Okay. Now, it also has scientific meanings. For example, if you look in the summer, if you look about in the sky, there is a very big summer triangle. And the summer triangle, even in Manchester, in anywhere with even the heaviest light pollution, you can see those things. You can see those three stars, the summer triangle. And then in the Chinese mythology, that is the weaver girl, and this is the cowherd, and then you have two faint stars. They are actually their children. So those stories were developed. This picture is from the book, so you can have a look later on. So now I want to very quickly go to the origin of the story to say how those stories been passed down generations, and then why it needs to be updated. So even in the classics of poetry, 3,000 years ago, and then they have mentioned these two stars. Okay, so these two stars. So we have some slides there printed. So if you need more, you can pick it up. So, and also if you are interested in this, I can send you an email. But we have some printed copy there, so you don't need to worry about those things. So basically, those two stars were mentioned 3,000 ago in the poem. Now, roughly about 2,000 years ago in the Han Dynasty, they introduced those as a story. So basically, you have the stars first, and then later on, they made up some stories. But perhaps they have the story first. We do not know. We don't have record. But the record says this. Okay? So, and basically, in the Southern dynasties, they start to have a full structure of the story, saying that those two falling in love, and they were not allowed, and then they were separated. So the basic structure was there in the Southern dynasties already. Now, with this story, there's another story, which is called The Girl in a Feathered Garment. So basically, you have another story, which has nothing to do with the weaver girl story in this time, in Jin dynasties. And then now, what it basically says is this. So you have a man, and you have a girl. And then this girl have a bath somewhere, and then the man steal his clothes. And then the girl, of course, with those clothes, they fly to the heavens, right? So when they come down to earth to have a bath, and then they rely on their clothes to fly back to the heavens. Now the problem is this guy does not have a wife, so he steal one of the clothes of one of the fairies, and then of course this fairy couldn't fly back, and then as a result, they married, and then somehow when they married, they have children, but a woman, because she was adopted, she does not want to marry, but she was forced into marriage, right? And then forced to have children. So what she does was, later on, when their children grown up, and then she asked the children to say, okay, if it's possible, you can ask your father where he hid my original clothes. And of course, the man was not guarded because the children were just asking curiously. And then they told the woman, told the children, of course, tell their mother. The mother get the feather clothes, and then flew up to the heavens. And then when she settled and have enough strength, she come back to this place and then took her children away. So that was the story about abduction of a woman in Jin dynasties. Okay? Now, this is a very separate story. Of course, there's another story called Dongyong and Seven Fairies. But we're not mentioning it there. It's basically a mix-up of these two. But now, what I want to tell you is, of course, when those stories developed, and in this story, they developed, and then even in the Song dynasty, there was no mentioning of Niu Lang, which is the Cowherd stealing weaver girl story. Okay, so those stories were separated, but they were trying to enrich it. But the problem was, in Ming dynasties, it's the first time that they mixed these two stories together. So that now, in the very beginning, you have a genuine love story of two souls. And then you have another story of some guy stealing clothes from a woman and then force her to marry him. When these two goes together, you can think how awkward it would be. The problem that it will have is, for example, in modern days, so this happened 2 years ago in China, and I mean, it happened a long time ago, but it's come to the public, this chained woman incident, etc. So you all, I mean, many of you know this. If you don't know, it's perhaps worth search. And then now, the problem with this approach is the weaver girl and the cowgirl it was one a tale of true love, but the other one was the tale of opposing. So this was a tale of opposing patriarchy. So basically, people like the story because they fall in love with each other, forced to be separated by the celestial beings, by the god, etc. But they resist this; they're still in love, and they're not worried about. Although they can only meet once a year, but they don't worry. So this is why people celebrate this, because this is a story against patriarchy. The problem with those modifications was that when those two are mashed together, the story becomes distorted in a way that it still goes against patriarchy. Patriarchy, by patriarchy I mean existing power structure, etc. But it does not against male dominance. In fact, it actually supports male dominance. Basically, in a story, if you don't have a wife, if you are a man, use whatever method you can. You can even go and steal these clothes. You can even force somebody to marry you, no problem. I mean, of course, this is not only in Chinese mythology. In many mythology, in Egypt and everything, woman was just a tool to educate men or to fulfill, to enrich the men. So they do not treat women as an independent human being, but as an object. So this happened here. But what I want to say is, when did it happen? It happens in Ming Dynasty. So why in Ming Dynasty? We know that in Ming Dynasty, you have the new Confucianism, right? So new Confucianism, 宋明理学. And then those things, of course, initially those philosophers were trying to rationalize old Confucianism. But unfortunately, it was being used by the state to emphasize patriarchy. It's similar to the witch hunt story in Europe. So in Europe, you have witch hunt because they want to kill women, especially old women. But here, if resources is scarce, they want to harm women first. There are a lot of stories we will be discussing later on. But now, this story being distorted but become official version nowadays. One example is Taiwan's versions of the stamps. Of course, there can be a lot of stories, but officially, this is a stamp in 1981, okay? And you can see in the stamps, this is the cloth of weaver girl. And then the call tells this, and then he steals. So in Taiwan, same. In China, you look at this is 2010, only 15 years ago. And then they have these stamps. It's still stealing clothes. This is the cloth, right? So now, the problem with this is, what is true love? How can love last? You can't have love that's grown out of an evil tree. You can't have that, especially in other story with the feather garment story. It's a clear abduction of women, but these two stories, one is true love, one is adoption of women. Those two things cannot and should not go together. And now here, this is the example of how I did this. And basically, you have to have a true love to begin with, rather than just stealing the clothes. So I will not read this through, but the book is there, so you can have a look by yourself. So basically, so this is the second half of the book, of the story in the book. And then now, there's another one about logic, but I will perhaps go very quickly. And so as I said in the very beginning, one is patriarchy and male dominance. So the story itself, they are against patriarchy, but not male dominance. So we changed that. Now the second thing is logic. So now in the original story, okay, they were separated because those queen mother was very bad. She is an evil mother. She does not allow her children to marry a normal human being because they are gods. But of course, you can easily portray somebody being evil. So what's the solution? The solution is, okay, kill the guy. So if you have a bad person, you kill the bad person, you solve the problem. But actually, can you do that? No, you can't. You can kill the queen mother, you can get rid of queen mother, but you can't change the system. So the problem with this is the entrenched system, patriarchy, male dominant in a society. So this is why I do not want to portray this specific person as a bad person. You want to portray something like a systematic problem so that killing a person won't solve anything, okay? So this is how I did it, and in the book. Of course, this is very subtle. I'm talking a lot here, but when you read the book, you won't realize what I just said, anything. But because this is a children's book. But here, those are the things that is behind. Okay, so it's not an individual, it's an institution, and it's in the society. It's the society, it's the system that we want to change, rather than just, you don't like this guy, you get rid of the guy. No, that will not be helpful. Okay, so now, just want to say a little bit about the book. It's fantastic, so if you want to read, you can buy some copies. And so we have some copies here, and the original price is $16.99, but we sell it at £13 today at a discount. And Amazon is £13.40 something, so it's even cheaper than Amazon. And so in addition to the stories included in this, we have a lot of other factual stuff about the Chinese festivals, Chinese customs, etc. Okay, and so a lot of stories here, or almost the full collection. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Xiaobing. That was very interesting, and I also wanted to thank you and Zhaokun for inviting me to be part of this conversation. I have to admit that I wasn't sure I was the right person for this discussion, because I'm not a China specialist, let alone specialist in Chinese mythology and folk tales. And so what I know about China comes from my background in Asian area studies and the research I conducted on the history of science and technology in India and Japan. And it's in that context that I looked at intra-Asian scientific exchanges, especially between India and Japan, but also to some extent China. For example, scientific exchanges in the field of geology or earth sciences, right? And so I have been, for example, editing a volume, co-editing actually, a volume on women in science in the 20th century, which is due to come out soon with Manchester University Press, so in summer. And that volume contains 2 chapters on history of women in science in China, right? So it's via that connection that I came to join this discussion, and I hope I can contribute something meaningful to it. And I read Xiaobing's book with great interest. I learned a lot already. And so has my daughter. She should have been here probably because she already knows the stories much better than me, and she can identify some of the characters that she read or learned about in your book, or when she reads other books about China. So if the point was to educate, a broader audience who didn't know much about China, I think it's already working. So congratulations on that. It probably won't come as a big surprise if I say that I read the book mostly through the lenses of my own interests in the history of science and technology and also the history of knowledge making more broadly. And I was pleasantly surprised by the many insights that it offered into these topics, right? And I took many notes to use in my future research, especially about how women have contributed to processes of knowledge making in Chinese society, right? You know, the book is called Myths of China, but you know, myths are ways of making sense of the world around us, right? So in that respect, I thought they provided very good insights into processes of knowledge making, and also, you know, the gender relations and the role of women in Chinese society. And on reading the stories, especially those that were associated with creation, right? One theme that stood out for me was the fact that men were often portrayed as great inventors, right? So that's one thing. The creators of knowledge, so the creators of knowledge were almost invariably men, right? You have the gods Fuxi, I mean, excuse me if I'm not pronouncing
Yeah,
it
Fuxi,
right,
yes.
yeah? So he invented writing, musical instruments, he invented nets for fishing, right? Fire was also discovered by, I quote, wise men, right? Yeah. The god of farming and medicine, who again tests plants, medical plants on his own body, again a man, right? And women usually feature in roles, and I was thinking here about parallels with the current political situation, that, you know, they are saving men or saving the world or humanity from man-made, and I'm using this term on purpose, man-made disasters like wars, right? Yes. Or, you know, saving the world through their sacrifices, right? And then we have Neo, I think, the mother of humanity. Then also we have the goddess of mercy, and this is something that a goddess I could identify from my background in Japanese history is Kannon, right? Or in India, in Sanskrit, it's called Avalokiteshvara, so it's the goddess of mercy, right? Or they feature in another, I think, probably quite universal position of temptresses, right, or demons, right? So that's the other. But there were some exceptions, and one of the stories that stood out for me was the Butterfly Lovers, in which we see a young woman who I'm assuming must have been from a noble background, who is interested in poetry and literature, right? And she wants to pursue learning and education outside her home, and then she, with permission from her parents, she studies away. But of course, she needs to operate within the patriarchal constraints of the society, so she can only do so by disguising herself as a man, and that's the only way in which she can travel, right? And so it was interesting to think about some of the sides of knowledge making that were described in the book, and one of them, as I already mentioned, was medicine, right? When the god of medicine is testing the plants on his own body. The other one was about the management of environmental disasters like floods, right? So there were a lot of talk about flood control, right? Or generally attempts to modify the environment. For example, to build a story that was extremely interesting for me because of the work I did on telecommunications or communications in colonial India, was building infrastructures of communication. And the foolish grandpa removed the mountains, right? And there is a passage there that I thought sounded very 19th and early 20th century, actually, which brings us, you know, back to the topic of how these stories have actually been rewritten by more, you know, contemporary audiences, in which grandma says with a loving smile, "My dears, moving away might be so. Moving away from the village to avoid, you know, the mountains might be simpler, but by removing the two mountains, we will make traveling much easier. This will not only benefit future generations, but also unite people." So it's this idea that better communications actually brings people together, which is questionable. You know, if you're thinking about the current situation, right? We have the internet that's connected the world very well, but it's also divided us in so many ways, right? Yeah. And this will not only benefit future generations, but also unite people. It's not just about our village, it's also about encouraging trade, communication, and harmony among neighboring communities. So that was something that spoke to me, you know, in that passage when I read it. But one of the questions I had when I was reading the book was, how did you choose, what stories to include? It struck me, for example, and again, I must say that I'm not a specialist in Chinese history, but I read about China's folklore movement in the 1920s, right? And for example, 4 of the stories you have in this book, I think, were selected during that period as being, great Chinese folk tales.
Yes.
Right? The Weaver Girl that you already talked about, the Butterfly Lovers, Lady Mengjiang, I think, and the Legend of the White Snake.
Yeah.
Right? And I think during that period, so some of the Chinese intellectuals, they analyzed, for example, the story of Lady Mengjiang, right? And they, using the what was called at the time the peeling method, I think, in which you basically try to trace the story across different narrative genres, so the classics as well, right? Or inscriptions, historical documents, and dramas, to try to disentangle what was fiction from fact, so what was, history from legend, right? And so it was interesting for me to think about the fact that this folk tales have been studied before, and to think about why they were studied at the time, right? In the point about the story of Lady Mengjiang, as it's told here, is that feeling actually wins in the face of ritual, right? So it's actually a criticism, I think, if I read it correctly, it's a criticism of tradition, right, of Confucian literati who cannot accept this kind of, emotions expressed by women. This is what but I think the other thing that came out of, that folktale movement was an understanding of the crucial role that women actually played in transmitting this folk songs, especially. Here I don't know, I'm not very clear about the distinction between different genres, right? But especially folk tales, women were essential to the transmission of these stories. And to my mind, that is, we talk about the fact that, women are often, as you mentioned, vehicles for men to achieve something, but that's actually also an expression of women's agency in these stories, right? Because it's a way for them to show the emotions, right? To transmit the emotions, anger, if it's anger, or that they experience. So I like to think about them this way as well. So I think I'll stop here at that question. Maybe we can pick it up later and discuss some other points then. But thank you very much. I really enjoyed the book.
Yeah, I think you touch upon a lot of very interesting points that we try to elaborate here. So one of the things that not only in the Chinese mythology, but also in many other mythologies, women were normally treated as sometimes a troublemaker. For example, in Adam and Eve story, a creation story. And sometimes, of course, in the Chinese mythology, women sometimes will be treated in the very beginning in the creation myth as a sort of the savior of the world of, for example, in the story of Nuwa, basically when those two men fight, they made a disaster that they collapsed the sky, so Nuwa has to fix it. So woman was a sort of role that they're protecting the world from being destroyed by men. I mean, of course, those different stories, different schools of thought. Some schools will say, oh, woman is nothing. Some of the schools will say, no, we want to use this as a tool to against those mainstream mythology. So this is why they gave women a better status, because they are not agreeing with the existing schools. So in this way, the roles of women being shifted because they suit different purpose. So that's one of the things that you touched upon. Another thing which is the 4 love stories, the 4 classic love stories you were just mentioning, they are actually connected with what we want to discuss here. So the Weaver Girl story is basically the love between God and a human. And then now the White Snake story is basically become a normal human falling in love with a demon. So now in that story, Fahai, who is a normal man, a normal human beings, a normal mortals, wants to save this man from being trapped by demons. Okay, so they disregard any love. So love means nothing. So the thing that they want to protect is the existing social structure. And of course, now let's say, okay, now what happens if a human being fall in love with a human being? So you have this butterfly story, right? No, butterfly hours, right? So you have this story. This story, you say, okay, now this is a human falling in love with a human. But the problem was they are of different hierarchies. Although the woman is rich, but the man's family, although they are in the same status, but the man's family, the woman's family, they want to marry a higher positioned man. Or perhaps, in some versions, the higher positioned man wants to marry this woman, so they force this woman. So of course, this was again a tragedy, right? And then all those stories, they tell different stories, but the key thing is they disregard true love. They disregard feelings. And this is what you just discussed with, for example, Gu Jiegang's investigation of, for example, Lady Mengjiang. Lady Mengjiang is the first love story that Gu Jiegang collected and also featured in this book. So basically, I think even nowadays when we discuss men and women, some people will say, especially men, will normally say, oh, feelings, girls, women, they emphasize on feelings, but feelings are nothing. So you should be perseverers, and you should be this and that. So this discard of feelings is very strong because they say, okay, you have to be rational, you have to be et cetera, et cetera. But the problem is we live in the moment. We live at the moment. We are human beings. We have feelings. Of course, we want to do long-run stuff, but also we want to enjoy the moment. So those are contradictions, and then those contradictions have to be balanced. Those are the things that I think we can touch upon on when we discuss patriarchy, when we discuss male dominance, etc. But thank you very much. Yes.
And thank you, Xiaobing, for a wonderful presentation, and thank you, Amelia, for your insightful comments. I'm going to follow up with a few keywords I have seized on, and I'm going to also combine my comments with a series of questions for further discussion. And when I was reading this book, I had a lot of spiritual high-five moments, right? Because as if we were designing the syllabus for Intro to Chinese Studies syllabus together, because I think the kind of resonance also bespeaks some kind of influence, right, of those stories, which means that they have they are embedded in that kind of so-called cultural genes, right? And then it's some kind of must-know for insiders of some kind of cultural repertoire. And when I was reading Xiaobing's retelling, updated retelling of this story between Weaving Maiden and Cowherd, I can't help feeling that it's very much in the same vein of the May 4th elevation of love, right, or celebration of that kind of romantic feelings, particularly because in early editions of the story, there were a lot of emphasis on the notion of filial piety, as previous scholars have noted. And I think in this retelling that I'm not quite sure whether that element has been removed or for the prioritization of the notion of love, or because there's also the presence of the Queen of Heaven, right? We don't know what her relationship with the Weaving Maiden is, and but I'm just curious whether that kind of setup of character relationships also hint at the lingering presence of filial piety, but also foregrounds the effacement of it. And also I'm going to seize on another notion, that is gender, particularly when it comes to the story of Weaving Maiden and Oxherd. There seems to be a lot of interesting gender setup in this updated retelling. For instance, usually in earlier editions, it's the Thearch, right, or the Heavenly Emperor that has been serving as the mediator of the Weaving Maiden and Oxherd. Here, the story has substituted that character with a Queen of Heaven, and that kind of gendered choice, because just now you mentioned that the character serves as some kind of agent of institutionalized norms, and I can't help thinking of like such films as like Alien and some kind of animation like Castlevania, right? And you see those like bosses are always depicted as female, right? And I'm wondering whether that kind of depiction of the Queen of Heaven, or the setting of Queen of Heaven, can shed some new light on that kind of how to say, embodiment of institutionalized norms through female characters, or the matriarch, right? The matriarch as the agent of the patriarchal norms. And another observation related to gender is actually the gender of the children in the story. And it's fantastic to learn about the scientific correlation of the two children, because when I was reading like some early editions, there's usually just a reference to a single child, or not because of the one-child policy or something like that. Or it's very difficult to tell the singular from the plural in the classical Chinese. And here I think Xiaobing has chosen this daughter and son couple as the children of Weaving Maiden and Oxherd. And I'm wondering how that relates to the kind of normative conception of the family, and also whether there could be other possibilities for the kind of depiction. And interestingly, when I was preparing for this week's session for Intro to Chinese Studies, I was searching for some visual images, and surprisingly, those visual depictions have consistently depicted two sons, right? And but here, I think this is some kind of breaking through, and I'm wondering whether there are other possibilities of further breaking through. And in terms of gender of the children. And just now we have gone over some gender-related issues in Xiaobing's fascinating retelling of this story. And I'm going to end my comment with some questions on the translation, because I think Xiaobing's book is not just an adaptation or retelling, but also a work of translation, right? And the first question is about the Milky Way, right? And I think in a lot of editions it's called Heavenly River. And I'm not saying that which one is right or wrong, because there's like, and believe me, there are tons of papers written on that topic in translation studies. I'm more curious about what kind of, how to say, different impacts different choices of words can exert on particularly young audience, and also what the choice of the word speaks about its intended audience as well. And another, just now we mentioned this Chinese Valentine Day as the 7th day of the 7th lunar month. But inherently, it also prioritizes the Valentine's Day as some kind of reference point, right? And but when I was thinking about this issue, I think referring to the Valentine's Day as the West's the West, Qixi festival doesn't work either, right? Because it again repeats or replicates the kind of hierarchical referencing system. So probably we could discuss whether there could be another way of solving that communication barrier. And one last thing, I'm totally ignorant about that, and luckily we have a historian on South Asia here, and I know one book that's going to come out soon has an interesting distinction between Indian cow and Chinese ox, and the kind of ox herd or cow herd seems to be another contested point on translation. I look forward to further discussion about that, with some kind of animal element in it as well. Thank you very much.
Okay, so the first thing is that, why you use Queen Mother to enforce the law rather than the men? So first of all, we want to say that, of course, the traditional story also goes like that, so we don't want to change that, there's no. But in depth, if you want to dig a little bit more, you can say, okay, now, if you want to do, so in the book, we have two lines touch upon those Queen Mother. Basically, the first line was Queen Mother was compassionate, so she wants the weaver girl to go down to earth to experience what she hasn't experienced. So she gave permission to her to go down to earth. That's the first time we mentioned her, and the second time, the problem was, okay, although she was sympathetic to the girl and the boy's marriage, but there were a sort of huge law there that she has to enforce. But now we didn't say why she has to enforce that, or somebody asked her to enforce this law, but she enforced. So you can go, we didn't explore, and I want to speculate, but you can think of one thing, which is during the COVID period, especially when COVID first appeared in Wuhan. So who were sent to Wuhan? Only women in the Politburo, right? To do this, you can think, okay, now we think, okay, women as Nuwa who can save the world from human disasters, from natural disasters. Or you can think, like what Queen Mother did here, to enforce something that may not be may not be liked by people. Okay? So that's the thing that I do not have a conclusion, but I want you to think about those things. And the second, you talk about two children, why there is a girl and a boy. First of all, conventionally, this is what is done, and I don't want to change that. And in Chinese values, normally they prefer a lot of songs, but here, because they are god and goddess, so I didn't do much here. I don't think that I need to do more to do it. And that, given that in the summer triangle, and you actually you can observe in the summer triangle two very faint stars next to Niulang. So you assume that there are two children. And now, in terms of the translation, of course, in some of the, because in China, when you say Niu, means ox or cow, there's no difference in Chinese word. But in English, you have a feminine and you have, now, some people say, okay, this is an ox herd. Some people say this is a cow herd. And also, in terms of translation, you have Milky Way or Heavenly River, etc. So why we choose those Milky Way and why we choose Cowherd is because in English, this is what people normally say. And then this book is aimed at Western audience and Western children. I don't want them to feel distance from the book. So I want to tell the story, but I want to tell the story that people like to read and feel that they can connect with the book rather than just force upon them on certain things that you think is genuine.